not going to sim this super low poly, but like this is very inefficient for a game, and once you're happy with the shape, you should totally get rid of some of this extra crap. So if you go to your FX menu, and out of curiosity, so I think most of you, is there anyone whose animation here? Or are you all, okay, cool. Have you guys ever done like sim stuff at all, or like NCloth? Okay, okay. So I know, like, I teach it in CGI 2, and I'm teaching it in, like, Animation 1, just because I feel like most people sort of are hell-bent on doing something with it. So I'll just do, like, a brief rundown of NCloth. So if you go into, and this is, like, NCloth for static things and not animating it, that's kind of a sort of different thing that involves extra steps. But if you go into your FX tab, that's going to be all your stuff for, like, particle sims, NCloth. You can do, there's a really fun thing you can do with dynamic curves where you use a curve and it basically animates itself and then drives a rig, so it's great for stuff like tails or like lightly swaying hair. But in this case, I just want cloth, so I'll do NCloth, and then just create NCloth. You guys can see, okay, cool. So this is also dependent on the time slider. When you guys are viewing the time slider for any kind of simulation, NCloth, particles, whatever, you do want to make sure that, did I not just make you a Blinn? You do want to make sure that you are using a playback speed that is every frame. If it's not every frame, the sim is not going to run correctly. I usually just do max real time because I feel like that's more logical than whatever it does when it does free play. So you just hit play, and I made the ground an NCloth because I'm an idiot. But you'll notice that the ground is just casually dropping through the air. I'm actually going to delete both of those NCloths because that was not supposed to be the thing. So I'll just do create NCloth. What is happening here? Do I have 2 P cubes? Oh, no. Okay, wait. I think I did the weird thing, yeah, where I accidentally duplicated the geometry. So there's like 2 faces sitting on each other, and that was dumb. I've been doing that a lot recently, and I don't know why. All right. And that's why that's why I was making 2 NCloths, because I had like 2 separate face chunks in that one pillar. What are you doing? I get super angry at Maya. That's just my default thing. All right. For the 3rd time, click on your object, NCloth, and create it. Now there's 4 of them. Why? This is getting progressively stupider the more I try to click on things. All right. I'm going to make a new cushion out of sheer anger and frustration. That was like me in my demo of like dynamic curves and stuff today. I'm just like, why is everything breaking? Like, why? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a new cushion. So I will smooth that, and I will just smooth that again. And hopefully, if I delete the history on this, and then do NCloth, create NCloth, thank God we get a single NCloth object. Usually it's not that difficult. All right, so now when you first create NCloth, it's going to make this little NCloth node, and then also put in a nucleus in your scene, and the nucleus is, if you look in your attribute editor, it has a lot of stuff for like gravity, the direction of gravity. It also has some stuff for like wind speed, airspeed, all that stuff. So if you wanted to make like a blowing flag or something like that, you would probably just want to turn up like the wind speed, and that would cause it to blow in a specific direction. For the case of a cushion, so let's just like play this really quick, and you'll notice that it sinks through the floor, and it's probably just going to keep falling forever. You can kind of see that it is actually getting some interesting sort of ripply things going on in it. I'm sure this could be used for something, I'm just not sure what. But this is not what I wanted. I wanted it to sort of attach to the floor. So I'm gonna reset my sim, move this up slightly. You want to make sure that NCloth gets very, very unhappy if it is clipping through objects it's supposed to be interacting with, including either itself or other NCloth. So like in this case, I want it to be, I want it to sit on the ground, make sure that it's not like clipping through the ground, because that'll blow everything up, and sometimes crash Maya. So if I want this ground to be something the object interacts with, select the ground, and then just do NCloth, create passive collider. And what that's going to do is just say, hey, this object should interact with your NCloth. So theoretically, if I sim this, the cloth will then fall down and just sort of like squish down ridiculously onto my object. And it just kind of keeps flattening itself out, which is like presumably not what you're looking for. Also do note that like it's not a terrible idea to just add a crap ton of extra frames to your scene in case. It always sucks when your sim hits the last frame and you're like, no, I liked that, and then it restarts and you have to let it play out again. So I usually just add more frames than I want. So anywho, making this not look stupid. If you go into the NCloth itself, you can go in, you can set stuff like collisions. Self-collide is usually something that you're going to want to turn on. That's basically just saying it's going to interact with itself. And then there's like a bunch of other stuff. I would probably not worry about this unless you're trying to do like an animated sim. Bounce does some weird stuff. In this case, what I want is to basically like reinflate this and act like there's some kind of like pressure, air, or stuffing inside of this cloth. So if you go down to, there's like actually a tab called pressure. If you go down to that, and I'm just going to take this pressure bar and I'm going to slide that up. And you can see that it's actually reinflating my NCloth like some kind of insane bouncy house. Which, fun fact, you can actually use and make a bouncy house like that if you wanted to. But a lot of times it'll sort of like pop the NCloth back up. And you could like conceivably sort of play with this a little bit until it gets some kind of setting that you're sort of happy with in terms of like the shape and the crinkling it's making. Like, you just sort of, maybe what was that before, it was like kind of interesting. But if you ever decided like, oh, that's a really cool point, like I actually like what it's doing, say, right now, I guess, if you're like particularly fond of this odd shape that it's making, you can just grab your NCloth and duplicate it. And that's just gonna pretty much like save a little backup of that particular mesh. So if I play this, that's just gonna do its own thing, and this is gonna also do whatever inflatey weirdness the NCloth is doing. So that would be my first thought of sort of how to do something like that. Perhaps not the most intuitive way, but it will get you some sort of basic air mattress-like effects almost. That actually looks just like a deflated air mattress. So I mean, you could try doing something like that with NCloth. That'll get you some basic little wrinkles, and then if you wanted to do something else, you could probably actually throw in wind. But before I go insane with this, is that like actually helpful at all? Cool. So my sim's gonna reset. Is that, oh, okay. So really quick, I'll just show you sort of what wind looks like, I guess. Let me just sort of let that sim out. So I'll start with pressure, and you can see it's just sort of like, ooh, yes. Where you get that nice sort of, well, I mean, this is ugly, but you do get sort of like those like little mini wrinkles in it. And the more geometry you have, the more detail your sim can have. I'm just not gonna go super insane with it. But if I went into my nucleus and I turned on a little bit of wind and wind noise. So wind speed is basically just, I'm going to take wind and just blow it straight in a direction. In this case, the direction is like the X, Y, and Z, so it's just going to blow straight along the positive X, so from the left to the right of my screen. So I'll just make that really aggressive and go ahead and play that, and you can see that like your NCloth is now doing whatever it's doing, which is stupid looking. So I'm going to sort of undo that. Actually, I'm just going to restart my sim because I think I've taken that past the point of where I can fix it. But you can also maybe add a little bit of like wind noise in there, and this would potentially help you if you're maybe to like get a slight variation in the wrinkles in this. Like you can see it sort of starts pushing one side a little bit more. And this is not particularly something I'm fond of, but again, if you refined it, that might sort of help you. Or you could just sort of take it and get this like base shape with the nice like sort of organic crinkles, and then use those to bring it into like ZBrush or something else to actually sculpt it. Honestly, it's probably would make more sense to start with something like this, and then just like texture on the rest of the little details if it's a game asset, because having the actual resolution in there is probably excessive, but would work for something like 3D printing. And if you guys have ever tried to use the Maya Mesh Reduce feature, you will know that it is absolutely terrible and literally just cuts out random geometry from your object without really paying attention to the shape of your object, which in this case it actually wasn't completely awful. Other weird thing that you can do really quick is just grab, so I'm gonna, if you go into your NCloth, you can actually, at the very top of the shape node, just check off enable, and then I'll actually turn off the sim. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide that really quick. Unless I'm going crazy, and I might be, if you hide the cloth but don't disable the sim, it might keep running in the background, but I just like being safe and turning it off. But what you could do if you wanted to is sort of move this around and basically turn it into a new end cloth. So if you want it to like squish a little bit differently, just take your shape, do end cloth, create end cloth, huzzah, and then really quick, I'm going to turn off the wind because that's super distracting. And then I'm also just going to turn on some pressure for this as well. And you can see that has a completely different and highly questionable effect. Yes. Good. Okay. Indeed. Yeah, it's a little uncomfortable. It kind of looks like a burrito. But I mean, actually, so by doing that, you do get a slight bit of extra variation within that cloth. So we start, God help me. So we started with this like sad flat thing with like little wrinkles on the corner. And because of me dropping it differently and putting pressure differently, you can see that like this side is a little bit more squished. And now you have like actual real person wrinkles in this cloth. So it's completely not unreasonable to go through and like drop the same object multiple times with different cloth properties on it. And then if you went in to something like, and this is like usually pretty much the same process I would do with 3D printing. You can go into something like Mesh Mixer, because I don't feel like opening ZBrush takes forever. And then like actually do a nice reduce, and depending on the complexity of your wrinkles, it might actually kind of get you something not terrible that could potentially be used as a game object. So I'm just going to assign that a new shader. Control A to select all, and Shift R to reduce that. And if I turn on my wireframe by pressing W, you can see what it's doing to the geometry. So I'm just going to kind of keep doing Shift R. And you can see like the flat areas, it strips a lot of geometry, and the little wrinkly areas, it does a bit less. That's probably, and you can see it does like a kind of reasonable job of holding that geometry in. So this is like kind of game asset squishy pillow, more or less, with some questionable edge loops here. ZBrush does a better job at doing this in general. I just didn't feel like opening it. Was that helpful? Cool. Is there anything that you guys are also curious about in terms of like end cloth or other random things? Yes.
Would Mesh Mixer's reduce feature work well on human models?
It does work reasonably well. Heaven help me. Yes, let me actually show you. I have a human model just casually laying around on my computer. It is this one again. Let me just mesh. Smooth, smooth. All right, so this is like the human model. I will export this. But yeah, it usually does a fairly decent job on stuff. That was not rational. ZBrush is both more robust and faster, but again, you don't always have access to ZBrush, and this is just sort of like free and available. So if I go in and just again, Control A to select all, Shift R, you can kind of see what it's going to do. So like, even this is pushing the point where I would just suck it up and open ZBrush, because by the time it takes to process this, I could have opened ZBrush and done this like 8 times. But yeah, I mean, it'll definitely work. This is actually what I used to use for everything before I realized that ZBrush had a thing that worked 8 times better. And you can see it just takes like, oh my God, what? That is the worst calculation I have ever seen this try to perform. What? Do not accept that. That is so bad. That's actually, it should have done better than that. That's actually very strange. But what? Or something. The reason that I actually don't like the Mesh Mixer function if I have ZBrush available is because right now it calculated this for 50% reduction. If I edit this, it has to recalculate the entire thing again. Where ZBrush, like you calculate it once and then it just sort of, you can toggle it to be whatever you want almost instantaneously. But yeah, that was super weird. Any other questions? All right. Okay, I'm gonna stop with this. Although if I knew how to replicate this, I can see at some point this being a desirable pattern for some reason onto mesh. And I'm thinking like purely, so like what if I, put it where I actually want it. God, all right, sorry. I was hoping that would be easier to get to. Weird. So like if I were to throw this back into Maya, I could conceivably do a thing where, oh my God, what? Was I not just in that? Props, Dragonflight Blade, scenes. When you try to be organized, but you just make a bunch of stuff for yourself to click on. Wait, what? Ah, God. Fine, accept. All right, I didn't actually accept it because I'm a dingus. But I'm thinking you could do something really, really strange and like actually get that pattern on the geometry. If you were to put the correct mesh in, and you could do one of those things where you like select the faces and then do an extrude and turn off keep faces together. It would actually, like if I went and then smooth that, if I went and I smooth that model, if it doesn't blow up my computer, and assign this a material that is actually visible, it bakes that into the mesh, which is kind of cool. I just have absolutely no idea what caused it to do that in the first place, but it is kind of like a happy mistake if you, for some reason, need this pattern in anything.
I would wear those pants in a heartbeat.
Right? They feel like the unholy combination of like a diner chair and the puffy jacket from Back to the Future. But yeah, I mean, like that's a really cool, easy effect if there's a good way to reproduce that geometry. I might save that. Because it's unfortunate that the rest of this is doing whatever it's doing, because it did that to like most of the body. That's uncomfortable. That's like looks like Two-Face or whatever from things. Anyway, any other weird stuff you guys want to see while I'm doing sort of random Sims Mesh Mixer or whatever, or just other random things? All right, cool. So like I said before, I'm just sort of doing random demos at this point. Since we seem to have a plethora of time, I might do a quick, like, here's how to model a basic face, because that was also one of the sort of organic modeling things people seemed interested in. Oh, holy crap, wait. I just realized I actually forgot like an entire bit of the other most popular thing besides modeling was actually optimizing prints to print faster in Cura. So I'm going to actually do that really quick because I was bad and didn't write that in my notes. So my plan was to basically do a bunch of sort of like modeling and Cura settings this week. Next week I'll do some more painting stuff because it seemed like that was probably more relevant when you guys are actually going to be painting. So I'll go over stuff like masking, where I'll like actually have something where I can like mask it off with tape and do some other stuff with that. If there's extra time, I can do more modeling stuff. And then I was thinking kind of at the end, since it seems like it's not relevant to most people's projects, I would do sort of like a little impromptu thing on organic modeling for those that were interested in it, since I know that's not something that's, I think, really taught for game people. But it seems like there was interest. Anywho, all right, so I'm just going to use the same Cura file for this hinge. I'm just going to make it ginormous, and that is what we are going to use for this weird how to scale things in Cura. I will make this 120 millimeters, which doesn't fit on my build plate. I will make this 100 millimeters, which does fit. All right. So I'm just going to assume that I want to keep all my settings the same. So really quick, I'll show you the difference between a 0.6 and a 0.4 millimeter nozzle with the same, assuming that you want the same wall thickness. So a lot of times I run 2 walls on my stuff with a 0.6 millimeter nozzle, so walls of 1.2 millimeters thick. So I'll slice that, and all right, so that's about 6 hours, 4 minutes, and that's again, 0.6 millimeter nozzle, 1.2 millimeter wall thickness. So if I take that to a 0.4 millimeter nozzle with all of the same other settings, we go from 6 hours to 8 hours 30. So that added 2 hours onto your print time. And this is a relatively not super crazy model or like super huge model. For stuff like giant weapons, that can reduce your, switching to a larger nozzle size can shave your print time down by a really, really aggressive amount. Like, it can potentially cut off up to 30% of your print time. Which is why I usually recommend doing that, again, if you're printing like huge props. I actually have a printer which I pretty much just leave a 0.6 millimeter nozzle in it all the time. Anywho, I'm going to demo this just with like 0.4 millimeter nozzles, since that's what's on most of the printers right now. But there are a few other settings that you can use in Cura to shave off some print time. One is using less walls, which I don't necessarily recommend because presumably you have the number of walls in there that you have for stability, and apparently that's only shaved off 8 minutes of time, which I categorically do not believe is a thing. But either way, so I'm gonna guess that's one of those things where like functionally it would take significantly longer, it's just not estimating that time for some reason. But you'll notice like on the inside, there is a ridiculous amount of infill happening, and most of, like I mentioned this before, but like most of the strength of a print comes from the walls, not the infill. So if you are doing this much infill for stability, it's probably not going to do as much as just adding an extra wall, and it'll take like 4 times the amount of time to print. So there's a way to shave down infill super aggressively in Cura, which doesn't exist in Simplified. It makes me sad. But if you go down to infill, right now it's set at 10%, and there's no gradual infill steps. And this is like one of my favorite magical settings in Cura to speed up your prints. So basically, if you hover over it, it actually tells you what it does. But it is basically will reduce the infill percentage by 50%, however many times you specify it to in that little box. So right now, like I'm gonna be really aggressive and set this to 20 and do a test slice really quick. Because 20 is usually, if I'm trying to get like a giant smooth flat surface, usually kind of like what I'll go with as a safe infill for that. It takes so long. Okay. All right, so right now we're at 10 hours and 42 minutes. If I turn on gradual infill steps to say something like 2, so what that's going to do is do 20% down to 10 and then 10% down to 5% infill. And I just look at, so the gradual infill step height is basically how thick is a slice of that geometry. So right now it's set to 1.5 millimeters, so that's saying 1.5 millimeters before the top, it's going to divide the infill density by half, and then 1.5 millimeters below that, it's going to divide it in half again. So basically we have sort of a 3 millimeter layer at the top of your print where it starts increasing the infill. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I slice this, we're at, like I said, I think 10 hours, 42 minutes. And that shaves it down to 8 hours, 3 minutes. And doing this, like I said, most of the stability is going to come from the walls. So as far as I'm concerned, you could take this down to like 2% infill and be more or less fine. I know someone actually tried to use, I don't remember who, but someone actually tried to use this to load their dice, which was kind of funny, I thought. But you'll notice, so like as I go up, you can see this is like the 5% area, and then it'll start doing like significantly denser layers of 10 right on top of that. And if you go up a little bit more, again, it'll go to sort of 20, etc. But that's like one of my favorite ways to sort of reduce print time in Cura. They actually have a similar thing for support. And this is kind of a trashy model to test it on because there's not really anything that needs support. It was designed to print without it. But if you look, they have gradual support infill steps as well. So that'll do the same thing. So if you're ever printing, you have something like a mask, and you need to print really obnoxiously tall supports, you can turn on the infill steps for that as well. And then you can go up to like something crazy like 50% density and get like reasonably nice smooth edges under whatever you're trying to use supports for. But for most of the support, you're printing at 5% density kind of thing. So that was my 2 sort of really big hacks for printing faster in Cura. You can also do tests. I usually just sort of find a speed that works. You can conceivably, if you want to, print, like just change the print speed so it's faster. But at some point you're going to run into issues usually of like under extrusion or issues where it just like can't put out enough filament in time, or you're going so fast that the printer is like shaking back and forth, and that's leaving sort of, usually it's referred to as ringing, but like weird sort of lines on the outside of your print just due to printer vibration as it's going around. Apart from that, so this is another setting which a lot of times it won't make a huge difference. It depends entirely on your model. And that's fill gaps between walls. So this is more of a thing. Let me actually turn off supports really quick. Did I do that already? I did. Okay. Honestly, minimizing supports is one of the best things you can do to reduce your print time. Which is usually, if you've caught on to my mania about printing support lists, that's actually why, among other reasons. But, so fill gaps between walls. For giant models like this, where you're pretty much just doing, really easy perimeters, it's not going to make a huge difference. If I throw in something else with thinner walls in it, I'm trying to think if I have anything on hand. I don't know if I do. I do. All right. I'm gonna delete this really quick, and I'm gonna grab a planter really quick because this does some weird stuff to that. But basically, if you have like really, really thin walls, it goes through and it tries to, if there's a space that's like not quite big enough for extrusion, but like it's kind of a little gap, it'll go through and like put little blobs in there, and like blobs of plastic. And doing all of those extra travels and extrusions usually causes a bunch of extra time on your print. And a lot of times it doesn't do anything particularly great for what is this, an eyeball? What is this? That's not what I tried to grab. Oh, whoops. But a lot of times, like, it won't really add any structural support to your print at all, and it just adds a crap ton of extra time to your print. So if I grab this and rotate it in a direction, all right, so I'm just going to assume that these settings are fine. I have no idea what they're doing for this model. I've been having perpetual issues printing this, and I think it's because of how the model is designed, and it's been really annoying me. But it's good at demonstrating gross walls. This is actually one of those times where, and again, I haven't nailed down what the issue is, so who actually knows? Holy crap. All right, so we have 9 hours and 25 minutes for this, which seems completely insane. Normally this prints in 5. But you'll notice if I can find some of the areas, so like in between these walls, all of these like weird little tiny gaps. You can see there's like all these like little itty bitty sort of blobs of plastic around. That is usually what this fill gaps between walls does. So if I set this to nowhere, theoretically, that should get rid of those lines, unless there's something else, and shave down the print time probably by, I'm going to say like 2 hours. Other things, this is actually designed to print with a 0.6 millimeter nozzle. I'm assuming 0.4 millimeters, and that's probably also causing issues. But that is a separate thing. Okay, it shaved an hour off the time, but that's still an hour. Okay. So a lot of those lines are still kind of there. I think that's basically where they're kind of less and like positioned differently. So previously, buttons. I do wish that there was like a universal navigation system for 3D software. That would make everything so much easier. But basically you'll see now that there's a lot fewer of those little dots. Like it's not trying to go in and like fill this little bitty area and this little bitty area. It's just sort of leaving those be. So part of the reason this is so terribly optimized is because I'm trying to print it at the wrong size nozzle. Like I said, this was actually designed for a 0.6. And that would also probably get rid of a lot of the gaps. I'll try it the way it was designed to do, but that's another thing. Again, not so much for huge prints, because it's not going to make a difference for that, but like for if you're ever doing thin stuff, potentially masks, or like tiny figures, that can definitely save some print time. Honestly, I've also never really found a reason to actually fill those walls. But yeah, so I mean, you can see like this is one where it's actually it's designed to print like this, so it's just doing two loops around the edge. If I switch this back to everywhere, we go from 4 hours, 50 minutes. That's probably going to add like an extra at least half hour onto that print time. And realistically, this is also one of those weird prints where like it takes, if it estimates it takes 5 hours, it actually takes 6. But yeah, so let me see if there's any other weird stuff in there. Yeah, so that tacked on an extra hour of time by filling those gaps. And you can see, it's I guess a little bit more obvious here, but you can see like all of these like weird, super tiny edges it's just like randomly trying to add in here. And I'm like, that's not doing anything. Like, just get rid of that. That serves no purpose. The rest of that I think is actually like top layers, or like it's like top and bottom, because there's probably like an aggressive overhang around there. But it's weird. This model doesn't print well. But yeah, so that is like actually most of my sort of things I usually look at to make things print faster in Cura. Was that helpful? Does anyone have any questions about that or like other things they might have tried or were curious about? All right. Cool. Well, that was like, because I said this before and then I took it back. So let me actually I think that was actually pretty much most of the stuff that I planned to go over today. Blade thickness, bevels. So there's questions about adding magnet holes into things. I feel like I've sort of gone through and described how to do that. Was that anyone's thing, or do people have questions about doing that? All right. Usually, just to sum it up really quick, I guess, figure out what the measurements of your magnet are, and then I usually add like 1 or 2 millimeters on each side, and then just like Boolean a little hole out for your magnet. And then also, like, if you happen to be planning on adding magnets to your piece, you can try to build in areas into the design where they'll be a little bit, perhaps, less noticeable, or find ways to sort of cleverly integrate them so if they have to be exposed, they become part of your design. But that's more just sort of like a weird individualized thing, I guess, that you'll have to look at. So that was like actually all the stuff that I planned to cover today. So if you guys want to wander out and do some open lab, you're welcome to. I will be happy to hang out here and demo more stuff if you guys want to do things. But feel free to go if you would like to. I'm also going to actually look at this printer and see if I can figure out why it's not working. Does anybody have interest in other things to demo? Endcloth, Sims, things completely unrelated to this class. All right, this is kind of weird. All right, in that case, I'm gonna hang out here and see if I can fix this printer. You guys are welcome to do anything. If you think of stuff, just like let me know.